Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The instant the steel handcuffs locked around Nick Newman's wrists, everything in the world felt like it had shifted completely, because this wasn't how the story was meant to end. Not for the man who had given everything. Not for the man who thought he was saving Sienna from a nightmare even darker than anyone in Genoa City could possibly understand. The flashing police lights lit up the alley with bright red and blue colors as officers read his rights, their voices calm and follow the rules, not caring at all about the shock showing on Nick's face. Sienna yelled his name and tried to run toward him, but a detective pulled her back. Tears ran down her face as she kept shouting that Nick was not guilty, that he had saved her, not taken her. But the harm had already happened. Cameras showed up as if by fate, reporters yelling questions that felt like sharp cuts. And in that moment, Nick understood clearly that this wasn't just a mix-up or an error. This was a trap. A carefully planned, precisely timed, completely crazy trap. And somewhere in the shadows, Matt was watching everything happen exactly as he had planned. Just a few hours before, Nick was sure he was making the right decision. Sienna was really scared, talking about feeling like she was being watched, and about weird messages and threats that showed up and disappeared like they weren't even there. She had asked Nick for help, and Nick, feeling guilty and protective, and not wanting another innocent person to be hurt, agreed to help her leave town quietly so they could find out who was sending the threats. What Nick didn't know was that every move he made, every phone call he placed, and every wrong turn he took had already been planned by Matt. Matt had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. The anonymous tips to the police. The altered security footage. There are people who were planted to testify under oath that Sienna appeared drugged, scared, and was being forced. Matt didn't just want Nick to be arrested. He wanted him to be overwhelmed by public anger and legal problems, losing all his trust, name, and liberty. As Nick was pushed into the back of the squad car, memories came rushing back in broken pieces. Sienna trembling in his arms, telling him she trusted him. The uncomfortable feeling he had when his phone briefly lost signal. And the weird car parked across the street that vanished the moment he looked at it again. Too late now. The engine started up loudly. And with that sound came the awful feeling that Matt had already thought of everything. At the station, the interrogation was relentless. Detectives placed pictures on the table showing Sienna lying unconscious in the back of Nick's car. Photos that Nick had never seen before, and they made his blood run cold because he knew for sure they were faked. They played audio of Sienna's voice crying and begging to be taken home, and she insisted she never made those recordings. Then came the last big hit. A signed statement from a supposed eyewitness saying Nick threatened Sienna when she tried to run away. Nick asked for a lawyer, asked for a chance to talk to his family, asked someone, anyone, to hear him out. But the walls around him felt like they were getting closer with every word he said. The news of Nick's arrest spread through Genoa City like a bomb going off. Victoria stood frozen in her office, eyes locked on the breaking news banner, unable to believe what she was seeing. Sharon almost fell down when she heard Nick's name connected to the word kidnapping. Victor Newman's face turned serious and scary as he told his team to look into every detail, because he was sure of one thing. His son was being set up. But even Victor couldn't help but admit that the case looked really solid at first glance. Every piece of evidence pointed to Nick. Every timeline fit too perfectly. And Matt, always the clever persuader, came forward openly as the worried hero, the guy who had raised concerns about Sienna's safety weeks before. The guy who had tried to let everyone know that Nick was getting too obsessed and acting too recklessly. His performance was flawless. His sorrow convincing. His outrage righteous. No one even thought that he was the one who had created the terrible situation that was now hurting everyone. Meanwhile, Sienna was unraveling. Guilt kept bothering her as she went over every chat, every time she had trusted Matt, without ever thinking he would use her fear against her. When the investigators asked her again, they gently pushed her until she started doubting herself. Had she really understood Nick's intentions? Had fear colored her memories? Matt was expecting this slow wearing down of people's minds, understanding that being confused could be just as effective as being told lies. Alone in the interrogation room, Sienna finally collapsed, crying that she couldn't tell what was real anymore. That moment of doubt was all the prosecution needed to make things worse for Nick. Inside the room, Matt let out a rare smile for himself. This wasn't about Sienna alone. This was revenge. Nick had messed with Matt too much, got in the way of important deals, spilled secret information, and treated Matt in ways that Matt couldn't forget or forgive. Framing Nick wasn't just justice, it was art. As Matt looked at the next part of his plan, it became clear that Nick's arrest was just the start. Witnesses would change their stories. Evidence would come out. And if Nick somehow managed to get free from this situation, Matt was ready to hurt him emotionally instead. Because the biggest surprise, the worst truth of all, still hadn't been shown yet. In a quiet holding cell, Nick sat by himself, his head in his hands, the feeling of betrayal pressing heavily on his chest. He thought about his kids, about the images they'd see on the internet, and the things they'd hear from other students at school. He thought about Sienna, wondering if she would ever be able to forgive herself for believing the wrong person. And most of all, he thought about how scary it was that the trap had completely surrounded him. A trap so crazy and so carefully planned that getting out of it might mean losing everything. As the cell door slammed shut, Nick raised his head, his eyes filled with anger and resolve, because even now, even when things were at their worst, one thing was clear. Matt had made a big mistake. He had underestimated a Newman. When the truth finally came out, just like it always did in Genoa City, the results would be big, the revenge would be harsh, and the effects would never go away. Because this wasn't just a kidnapping case. This was war. Collision. The cell door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through Nick Newman's bones. The metallic clang ringing out like a verdict had already been handed down. The holding cell was cold, the concrete bench hard and unkind, and the flickering fluorescent light above made a buzzing sound like a bug that wouldn't stop moving. Nick stayed still, his hands held together, going over the past 24 hours in his head with no mercy. Every decision, every turn, every moment he had thought he was keeping Sienna safe. At some point during those events, Matt sneaked in like a ghost, invisible and impossible to stop, turning honest plans into proof of a crime. Nick took a slow breath, trying to calm his heartbeat, because panic was exactly what Matt wanted, and Nick wouldn't let him win that way. Down the street, Matt stood in front of a mirror in his penthouse, carefully fixing his tie with calm and precision. The news played quietly in the background, showing Nick's mugshot on the screen, with the headline shouting, "Newman heir arrested in kidnapping shock." Matt managed a small, faint smile. Phase 1 went better than he expected. The outrage was immediate, the doubt poisonous. And best of all, Nick looked surprised, like a man who had just realized the ground under him wasn't really solid at all. Matt took his phone and sent one text message to a number he didn't know. "Proceed." The reply came seconds later. "Witness secured. Story locked." Back at the station, the pressure intensified. Nick's lawyer tried to control the detectives, but the district attorney was already involved in the case. He got interested because of the media attention and the chance to bring down a Newman. They took Nick back for questioning, and this time they had a pile of papers that made his stomach feel sick. Financial records, GPS data, phone alerts showed he was at places he never really noticed before. But now, because of Matt's careful actions, it looked like someone was watching and controlling him. Nick tightened his jaw as they claimed he had planned the abduction ahead of time, that he had purposely kept Sienna away, and that he had used her fear against her. Every lie was based on a little bit of truth, twisted just enough to seem believable. Meanwhile, Sienna was by herself in a hospital room, covered with a blanket she hadn't asked for, her hands shaking as a victim advocate talked gently next to her. The words mixed together: safe, protected, cooperating. While Sienna's mind started to go crazy. She knew Nick hadn't hurt her. She knew he had tried to help. But every time she closed her eyes, unwanted pictures came back. Images that didn't make sense. She'd wake up feeling tired and confused, with voices all around her and a sudden strong fear that had no reason. Matt had told her once, in a quiet way, that stress could break memory, and that trauma could change how truth is remembered. At the time she'd brushed it off. Those words came back to bother her, slowly spreading through the spaces where she was sure of herself. Victor Newman came to the station as if he were a storm made real. Just his presence made the officers in the corridor stop and listen as he asked for answers, speaking quietly, in a way that was both threatening and in control. But even Victor couldn't push through the evidence that seemed completely solid. The detectives were polite but firm. The DA was cautious but intrigued. When Victor asked to see Nick, The look in his son's eyes, full of both anger and determination, made him feel a sudden cold shiver run through him. Nick told his dad everything, every single detail, and every feeling inside him that made him sure Matt was behind it all. Victor listened without stopping, already thinking about ways to stop Matt, and already sending his team to break down Matt's world one piece at a time. Still, even Victor knew this wouldn't be easy. Matt hadn't just framed Nick. He had created a strong wall of falsehoods around himself. As night came, the public's viewpoint became really harsh. Talk shows discussed Nick's previous relationships, his short temper, and his tendency to make sudden, unplanned choices. Old errors were brought out and turned into evidence showing someone was guilty. Victoria tried to ignore everything, but the effects couldn't be hidden. Newman Enterprises stock started to drop, board members talked in hushed voices, and even friends began to wonder if the family had kept Nick protected for too long. Sharon stopped by to see Nick for a moment, her eyes showing both pain and belief, making him realize that truth can still stand strong even in the worst times. When she left, Nick was alone again, and the silence felt like a heavy weight on top of him. That night, after a long day, Matt decided to take his next step. He went to Sienna pretending to care, speaking softly and acting like he was looking out for her. He told her that she was very brave and very strong. He gently suggested that Nick's intense focus might have looked like courage, but that pain and suffering could push people to act in scary ways without them even knowing it. Sienna tried to resist, but her tiredness made it hard to stay strong, and uncertainty started to take over where confidence used to be. When Matt left, he knew the idea had been started. If Sienna showed any doubt on the stand, even a little, the case against Nick would have no chance of being stopped. But what Matt didn't expect was a crack starting to form in his own perfect plan. A security tech he had paid for months before started getting scared when investigators looked at old video from other nearby businesses. A blurred reflection. A timestamp that didn't align. Small mistakes, not big issues by themselves, but they can be risky when they happen all together. Victor's group was moving around, tugging on strings that Matt thought were unseen. As Nick lay awake in his cell, looking at the ceiling, one clear thought kept him steady. Matt had gone too far with his moves. Because traps, no matter how complicated they are, always needed complete control. And control, Nick knew this better than anyone, was never lasting. By dawn, the battle lines were drawn. Nick Newman stood accused, isolated, and cornered. Sienna was confused, unsure whether to believe her memories or be influenced by someone else's control. Matt stood proudly, not knowing that the same mess he had caused was now starting to work against him. The trap was holding. For now. But in Genoa City, traps were meant to snap back. Collision. The courtroom felt suffocating as Nick Newman stood shackled before the judge, the weight of the charges pressing down on him like a physical force, every whispered murmur from the gallery cutting deeper than any accusation spoken aloud, because in those hushed voices he heard doubt, disappointment, and the terrifying possibility that the world was already prepared to see him as guilty, while across the aisle Matt sat with carefully arranged concern, his expression a masterclass in false sympathy that made Nick's blood boil. Sienna entered moments later, pale and visibly shaken, her eyes darting everywhere except toward Nick, and that single detail struck him harder than the handcuffs ever could, because he realized Matt's poison had begun to work. The prosecutor painted a chilling narrative of obsession and control, weaving together manipulated evidence, altered timelines, and distorted intentions until Nick sounded like a predator instead of a protector. And with every word spoken, Matt's trap tightened another notch. When Sienna was called to the stand, the air seemed to disappear from the room entirely as she testified in a fragile, fractured voice, insisting she hadn't meant to accuse Nick, only to tell her truth, but that truth wavered under questioning, bending just enough to suggest fear where none had existed, uncertainty where Nick knew there had been trust. Nick watched her struggle, his heart breaking as he recognized the invisible hand guiding her confusion. And when her voice cracked as she admitted she didn't know anymore what had really happened, the courtroom reacted like a beast smelling blood. Matt lowered his head, feigning grief, yet his eyes flicked up just long enough for Nick to catch the glint of victory burning behind them. And in that moment Nick understood this wasn't about justice at all, it was about annihilation. Victor's presence loomed like a silent threat in the back row, his fury barely contained, while Sharon clutched her hands together as if praying could undo what lies had already set in motion. But the judge's gavel brought everyone back to the brutal present, denying bail and setting a trial date that felt impossibly far away. As deputies led Nick from the courtroom, reporters surged forward, shouting questions that blurred into noise, and Nick locked eyes with Matt one final time, his voice low but unbroken as he promised this wasn't over. Because even as the walls closed in and the crazy trap threatened to consume him whole, one truth remained unshakable. Matt's perfect lie had a flaw, and when it cracked, it would shatter everything.